Hi, this is Marcia.
And this is Kelly.
We are the 2U's of 2U's Fiber Adventures. Thanks for stopping by.
You'll hear about knitting, spinning, dyeing, crocheting, and just about anything else we can think of as a way to play with string.
We blog and post show notes at 2usfiberadventures.com.
And we invite you to join our 2U's Fiber Adventures group on Ravelry. I'm 100 Projects.
And I am Better in Motion.
We're both on Instagram and Ravelry, and we look forward to meeting you there.
Enjoy the episode.
Hey, Marcia. Hi, Stephany.
Hi, Kelly. Hi, Stephany.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. We're here today. You notice, our listeners notice, we have a third person. And so we are talking with Stephany Wilkes. She's a sheep shearer, wool classer, fiber adventurer. She's president of the Northern California Fiber Shed Cooperative, and she's the author of a new book called Raw Material, Working with Wool in the West. I got it immediately. I had pre-ordered it, so it came in my mailbox immediately after it was published. I've read it. I loved it, and we're going to spend some time talking about it after we've done our project updates.
Yes. Kelly, do you want to go first with your project updates? Or...
Yeah, well, Marcia, what's that noise in the background?
Oh, yes, I forgot. I'm up on the third floor, but I'm having I have two fireplaces, one on the main floor in the living room and another one down in the basement. And the one in the basement, the damper has failed and all the mortar in the firebox has failed. And so they're rebuilding it. It's a 4-day project, apparently. And so they've been removing all the brick from the front of the fireplace. And so they've got not sawzalls, but drills and sledgehammers and vacuums. And so there's a lot of noise. So hopefully it won't be too bad on the recording, but...
Yeah.
And Kelly, you've got stuff going on at your house
Yeah,
too, right?
Robert's been drilling. He just stopped, so I told him 2 o'clock was our recording time, and so we're having electrical work done in our house, Stephany. So I guess Marcia and I have both had construction going on this week.
Yeah. Yeah. And unlike Robert, I can't tell these guys to stop.
Right.
Yeah. I waited 4 months to get them here, so I can't tell them to stop now. So
exactly.
Anyway.
So how's your week been, Stephany?
It's great. I landed at home, which means California, very late last night. I was in Michigan for about the past 10 days, visiting family and doing some readings. I'm originally from there, and so I was at my alma mater and Source Books in Detroit and the Ann Arbor Public Library. And so it was super fun, eating lots of cider donuts and cider. And seeing familiar faces and some new ones, too.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds fun.
I've never heard of a cider donut.
Yes, they can be, they're usually just the donuts served at cider mills. But they're a very specific sort of delicious donuts.
Okay.
I don't know if they have, I think they might have them at, I want to say Apple Hill near Sacramento here in California, but they probably have something like it isn't it Wenatchee area, Marcia, in Washington? The Wenatchee area that has all the apples?
Well, maybe because we're a huge apple producer, but I've not heard of cider donuts. So apparently I need to go do some research.
That might just be my Midwestern linguistic tell there.
Well, I know people who go to Rhinebeck talk about the cider donuts all the time. Maybe it's just a east of here thing.
But now I'm wondering, is a Rhinebeck cider donut and a Michigan cider donut the same cider donut?
Well, I have heard that although the folks who go to Rhinebeck rave about the cider donuts, those really aren't the best cider donuts in New York. So,
all right.
Yeah, Michigan, New York, California, Washington.
Okay, clearly we need to do some research.
We need a cider donut crawl. Oh, dear. Okay. All right, well, let's talk about projects. I'll start because I don't have a lot going on. I haven't worked on my sweater at all, so I won't talk about it. Although every time I talk about it, I forget to say what it is. It's called running water. So even though I'm not talking about my sweater, it is called running water. But I've been working on Argyle socks. I'm using variegated yarn in the diamonds, and they're going along really well. I've been happy with them. I'm almost finished with the foot of the first sock, the colorwork part of the foot of the first sock. So the leg of the sock has a diamond on the front and a diamond on the back, and then the instep has the diamond on the top. And you knit them flat, and then you join them when you get the instep done. Then you join them to do the heel. So I'm going to finish the flat part, and then I'm going to move on to the second sock and do the flat part of the second sock too, and then I'll join both of them and do their heels at the same time. My other project that I've been working on is the Humblebee socks, and this pattern was a gift. I got this gift from Sara Bauer. She's the designer. She has the Yarns at Yin Hoo podcast, and they're called the Humblebee socks because they have a little bee design on them. And I've gotten going. The last time we recorded, I think the last time I recorded, I said I just wasn't getting the rhythm of them yet, but I've gotten going enough that I'm really in a rhythm with those. So, but that's really all that I've been working on. Mm-hmm. So because of the winter weave along, I decided that I wanted to join this online weaving guild. Do you weave at all, Stephany?
I do not.
Well, I remember when I first, the first fiber shed that I was at, where I first saw you did the wool classing class or the wool grading class demonstration. You had on the most beautiful poncho, woven poncho.
Yes, it's
and we were having a poncho along at the time, and so I was really interested in what everybody was wearing anyway. But yeah, that poncho was beautiful.
Thank you. It's from Robin Lined of Meridian Jacobs. She has amazing ponchos, woven shawls and ponchos. So if I am wearing a beautiful woven shawl or a poncho, it almost definitely came from Robin Lined.
Robin, okay. Oh, that's nice. Yeah. The Weaving Guild, the Jane Stafford Online Guild, is a weaving guild that has videos. So this is the third season of it, and you join the guild for a year, and you get access to all of the videos that are previously recorded, plus the ones that she's doing. I heard her on a podcast. I think the podcast is called Weave, and it's. I heard her talking about it. She was interviewed on that podcast, and I thought, I'm going to join that guild. Anyway, $75 a year, Canadian, which actually was like a steal. It was like $57, I think I paid, US, to become part of this online guild and get access to basically 3 years worth of videos. And I think she has 10 videos a year. And they're all like 2 hours, something like that. So anyway, that's a lot of hours of weaving class.
That is a lot.
In my future. So that's pretty exciting. So I have a weaving project that I want to do, but I haven't started anything. Yet. So.
Oh, Kelly, I was just going to ask you, how's your the bench cover? I mean, you're weaving a cover for the weaving bench. How's that coming along?
It's not.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It's just sitting in the garage. I haven't really had a chance to get out there and do any more weaving. Okay. So, but I will. I am planning to finish it because I want to get something new on that big loom. Mm-hmm. So, all right. Well, Stephany, you have projects.
I do. I am knitting 2 things. So I have 2 works in progress. I'm just about to bind off yet another Purl Soho Boyfriend hat, which is a free pattern from Purl Soho. I think it's the 4th one I've knit. And this one is in Lani's Lana Rambouillet twist, which is a black and white wool twist yarn, a 3-ply that's undyed with just black and white wool and super springy. And that twist yarn knits up into the perfect marled hat. And I really recommend it for gift and travel knitting because it's just a simple knit 1, purl 1 rib all the way around.
Oh,
and makes a slouchy, like, tight rib. It's super cute for men and women. And then yesterday, right before my flight home, I cast on the Anna vest, which is a pattern by Karen Templar of Fringe Association. And I've got about 3 inches of the back piece done. And I'm knitting that vest up in a heavy worsted black Shetland and alpaca blend that I got at Black Sheep Gathering years ago. And I love it because it's an easy pattern, repeat to memorize. It's a 4-row pattern, knit and purl, and then, one knit, one purl, 1 row in the middle of those. And I know I'm going to get a ton of wear out of that vest in our coastal climate. So those are fun.
Mm-hmm. That sounds really pretty. Oh, I see it. Okay.
I'm looking it up too.
Yep, it's on Ravelry, and it looks like a little waffle knit, but it's an Andalusian knit.
This is nice.
It is. It's got 2 variations. You can do it with pockets or without, and then she also did it with 2 kinds of button bands. A rib knit or like a garter stitch. It's super cute either way.
Oh, that is cute. Yeah. Oh, that's really cute. I like vests a lot. Marsha was talking about making a vest just a couple episodes ago.
Yeah, I have a couple in my favorites that I've been thinking about, so I just haven't. Well, I have to finish some of my other projects before I can start another project.
Yeah, we'll talk about...
That's what I tell myself anyway.
We'll talk about that when we come to your projects. My shock when I looked up your projects to make show notes.
Oh.
That sounds really nice. Is there anything else that you're working on? You probably don't have time.
No, That's it. That's really it.
Oh, well, that's great. Yeah, with all the things you're doing right now, I'm kind of amazed that you're even in the middle of a project. But I guess it's important when you have plane time.
Yes.
Travel knitting is always important.
Yeah. We always, I mean, we've talked about this, but we always plan our travel knitting. You always have to figure out what it is you're going to take on the plane, in the car, to the beach, whatever.
On the Veterans Day camping trip. That's what I'm doing right now, trying to figure out what I'm going to take when we go camping.
Yeah.
So, well, Marsha, tell us about your stuff.
My stuff. Well, I'm sitting here right now as we're talking. I'm knitting on the slack-tied scarf that I'm making out of the concentric, the 100% alpaca. And I have to give an update on my socks. So, Stephany, what I've been talking about is we have a learn-along going on right now where people are doing a new technique. And so I decided to learn a new technique, which is afterthought heels. And a listener had sent a link to a video. And first of all, I have to ask, have you ever done an afterthought heel?
Yes, and I am a huge fan of the afterthought heel.
Okay, well then you're the good person to have on the... you're a good person to be interviewing because... so a listener made a link to a video, and in the video what the woman does is she knits a long tube, and then cuts that tube in half to make the 2 socks. And then she finds the location for the heel, cuts half of that tube to make the opening for the heel, and then goes back and knits the toe, and then and knits the cuff. So I'm making a pair of socks for my brother, and in order to get them the right length that he wants, I had to knit a 34-inch tube.
That's a lot of knitting.
So I have now finished the tube. And we were laughing in our last episode is that people were probably like yelling at the whatever they're listening to the podcast on their phone or their computer, probably yelling at it. No, that's not what you should be doing.
Well, yeah, because we had this long, confusing conversation about where you make the slice for the heel, and how do you know how far up the foot or down the leg is where you put that slice? Yeah.
So I have a little bit of an update on that as I did more research, and what I've been reading is basically the slice or the opening for where the heel is going to go. If you can imagine what your footprint looks like in sand, and then where your heel meets that little narrow side part of the outside of your foot, right where that meets is where you put the opening for the heel. That's what I've been reading online. So you're going to measure Mark's foot in sand? Yes. Or I could put paint on the bottom of his foot and make him step on a piece of paper or something. I don't know. Ink his foot, like babies when they do the newborns, they ink their feet. Anyway, so that's my understanding is how you do it, and then you pick up those stitches, and then there's all different ideas about how you knit the heel, because I guess one of the issue of afterthought heels is sometimes if you have a high instep or arch on your foot that they don't fit as well. So to add more space there, some people put in extra rows of stockinette. The last episode, this is true, I did read that you're supposed to put in 10 rows of stockinette, and I did have a listener, and I cannot find it now, but I can't tell you who it was, but said, absolutely not, don't put in 10, that's way too much. So, and then I've also read that you put in rows of short rows in there to create that space. So I haven't gotten to that point yet. I'm sort of trying to avoid having to think about it right now. Hopefully it won't be that bad. So Stephany, what do you think? Does this sound crazy what I'm doing? Or does it make sense?
It makes sense, but it's also like the most terrifying form of afterthought heel I can think of. Like, because it's sticking, right? It's sticking. Plus the afterthought heel. And when I've done it, I've always just put those heel stitches from the tube on waste yarn and kept knitting the tube. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, I totally understand the efficiency of it, but being a little afraid of steeking, even though I've done it, it's like, wow, steeking with a sock. That's really, it feels very delicate, you know?
I'm going to have a whiskey before I do this.
Steady hand.
For fortification.
No, I think after. I don't think before would be good. That could be a disaster.
But I did have a listener, though, Margaret MFW, and she contacted me, and she said, and she has a company called, and I cannot find a link to this. So, Margaret, if you're listening, you need to contact me again. Is that she has a business called Side Hustle Socks, in which she does, you send her your sock yarn, and she has a knitting machine, and she'll just knit the big long tube for you, and then sends it back, and then you can cut it and do this crazy thing that I'm about to do. So there you go.
Yeah, that sounds like an interesting idea, especially if you were getting tight for time on a Christmas present.
That's exactly what she said. If you're short on time, and this is how you can crank out a lot of socks as Christmas gifts. And then the other thing I wanted to say too is that remember, Kelly, I was mentioning last episode that my brother didn't like the other color I got for the heels and the toes, so we went this weekend and got him. I'm bending over to pick it up. I got these. They're called Knitted Wit Smarties, and they're just little mini skeins of 45 yards. So I've got a colorway called Carbon, which is kind of a dark charcoal gray. So that's what his heels and his toes are going to be. And then my other project, I said I was going to wait till I finished the socks, Kelly, but I could not wait. So I cast on for the my rabbit, the Claire Garland rabbit. Mm-hmm. I've now about ready to separate for the legs.
Oh, wow.
Hind legs. So.
That's cool.
But I just sit at the table with the pattern and a ruler, and I just go line by line, crossing off, like making a little check mark by every time I complete a row. Yeah.
Yes, there's as Nitty Barb says, there's knitting for drinking and knitting for thinking, and that would definitely be the knitting for thinking.
This is the knitting for thinking, yeah. And but it's interesting. It's already sort of beginning to look like a bunny, where the eyes are going to go and the shaping of the back. It sort of looks like a rabbit already.
Wow,
like a skinned rabbit, unfortunately, but a rabbit.
A rabbit pelt.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway,
well, that's cool.
But anyway, that's it for me with projects.
All right. Well, the pattern, Stephany, you have to take a look at that pattern if you haven't already. Claire Garland's patterns of woodland creatures. They're just really lifelike.
Cool.
Very cool. Yeah.
I will do that.
So, Marcia?
Yes.
I have in my show notes, you have 6 whips. You have 6 works in progress.
I do?
Yes, you do. Well,
Well,
Yeah, I
let's
think
see.
you
What
do.
have I got? I've
I
got
was
my
just shocked because Stephany Marsha's the type of person who always just had one project or maybe two projects. So
That's true. I would have maybe a sweater and a sock.
Yeah.
It was always a sock was going on, but but yeah, now it's true. I've got 6.
yeah, not that you've worked on in the last 2 weeks, but yeah, I was shocked. I tell you, shocked. All right. Well, it sounds like we're busy with our knitting. So what we want to do now is have a little conversation with Stephany about her super interesting life and the book and some of the things that I saw in the book when I was reading it and just some of the other interesting things that she's come across in her career of shearing. I want to just remind people about the book. It's called Raw Material, Working with Wool in the West. And Stephany, I don't know if I ever said her last name. Stephany is Stephany Wilkes, Wilkes. And you can get her book. I got it on Amazon. You can get it you have some local bookstores that are selling the book, Stephany?
Yes, but of course, nobody tells you which ones those are. So
Right.
I know Point Reyes Books is carrying it, and they'll have it at the Wool Symposium this Saturday.
Okay.
But there's a variety of them, and nobody tells you anything when you're the author, so you just don't know.
Okay. Well,
Well, let me just say I ordered mine on Amazon and I got it the next day.
Great.
oh wow,
So-
that's fast.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, look for it. Stephany has very graciously offered to give one of her books to one of our listeners. So we'll have a giveaway thread in the Ravelry group for anyone who's interested. There'll be some prompt and you can go into the thread and take part in the discussion to be entered in the giveaway. So first of all, Stephany, shearing. How in the world did you get to be a sheep shearer? I think that's so cool.
I think it's deranged. This is a little spoiler for the beginning of the book, but when I moved to California in 2007, which is pretty much where the book begins, I only knew 2 people here, and I thought I could make friends by joining a knitting group or taking a class at a local yarn shop. So I did that, and I was looking for yarn for a project. And like I say, I didn't know a lot about the West, but I knew this is where all the sheep were. You know, if you're from like east of the Mississippi, you just know that the 11 western states basically have all of the sheep country.
Oh,
Right.
that's interesting.
Yeah, if
Okay.
you're a knitter, you're like, right, that's where the big flocks are. So I walked into the San Francisco yarn shop and I said, where's your local yarn section? And this was my downfall, this one simple question. Because they only, at the time, and this does sort of, that was in 2007, so it does tell you how much some things have changed. There was only one brand, and it was Lamb's Pride, and it was in worsted and bulky, and that was it. And I was really, really perplexed by that. And I'm one of these people that when I really have a question, I really need to know why. And people tend to give you answers that are actually outcomes, not reasons, right? Like everything's made overseas. You're like, but that's an outcome. That's not
Right.
just a
Why is
reason.
it happening? Yeah.
Right. Why is this happening? And so I started digging into it, and I read The Knitter's Book of Wool by Clara Parks. And she alluded to a shortage of shearers, especially for people who have smaller flocks. And I heard that reiterated at the very first Fiber Shed Wool Symposium in November 2012. And so I really had gotten into my head that maybe this is something I could do, which is so, I mean, it tells you like not just how naive, but like I call it urban hubris that I had because, you know, it's like you take a natural dye class or you take a knitting class. Well, I'll just take a shearing class, right? This is, and there's so much embedded in that, intentionally or not, is so much, so many assumptions about and how little we understand agricultural labor. I think how little we value it, that I even thought in my mind that this was a thing that anyone could do. Right? That's what's embedded in that decision, is that I'll just try anything. And
well, and I think a little bit of courage on your part too. I mean, okay, maybe not necessarily thinking of the value in the skill, but don't you think you should give yourself a little bit of credit for being courageous?
I think it was for staying in class. Yes, like after I got there, but in the beginning, it really, I appreciate your kindness, but it could not have been courageous because in my mind, there was nothing difficult or scary about it.
Okay.
So at the very beginning, no courage was required of me. However, that changed in my first 10 minutes.
Right.
I was instantly terrified. Terrified. I had no idea that sheep could be so big. This was the first thing. They look so small in photos. And, they're 120 to 300 pounds. And some of them standing next to you, their heads are like higher than your waist. Sometimes you're like, I didn't,
Oops.
You're huge. All that sort of thing. So yeah, first 10 minutes, yes, I would say I was courageous after that. But
So how long have you been shearing?
I first attended shearing school in May of 2013. I did not shear much after that, so I've really been shearing from about early spring of 2014 to the present, and that's a season, so that would be 2014, 15, 16, 17, and 18 seasons, so probably five serious seasons of shearing.
One of the things that I noticed when I was reading through your book, and of course there's actually a chapter called Imposter, but one of the things that sort of resonated with me was this idea of not belonging, of kind of being, you alluded to the fact that you didn't start shearing right away after your class, of like being sort of an imposter and not feeling like you really could do the work or were the right person to do the work. I guess it kind of resonated with me because when I went to Fiber Shed the first time, and I was talking about this in the last episode, when I went to Fiber Shed the first time, it was in 2016, and it was a really hopeful atmosphere, and I sort of got sucked in a similar way. Like, I want to be part of the Fiber Shed. I want to be part of the supply chain. And Marsha and I have talked about how we both, wanted to be part of that. But I also have this feeling kind of like, but I can't be because, nobody in my family has a business. I don't really know. I mean, there's a part of me that's like, I don't really know what I'm doing,
Yeah.
So that idea kind of resonated with me. And then you kind of had that theme throughout the book. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about that.
Oh, I have so much to say about that because it's so fraught. Because, of course, some of it is true and some of it is what we put on ourselves, right? So, I mean, I think doing the book made this true. I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm not a farmer. And I don't know what it is to have animals every day and to be really tied to a land base. I'm tied to a regional land base. I'm tied to my state land base. I feel that very much, but I'm sure it feels different than someone who can own their land. But I think too, right, there's, when we talk about that reality, is that a lot of people who want to work in agriculture just cannot afford land, at least not in the West. And that's a whole other book about, the corporations that are doing things like buying vineyards. I heard recently, and I shouldn't say this because somebody's going to fact check it, and that would actually be helpful. But, I've heard there are entire counties where basically corporations headquartered in other countries own all of the water rights effectively because they own the property. So the women, I highlighted people in my book, though, who were doing the work, because I'm like, this is interesting to me that I see it as starting with land, but actually you can just start with the work. And that doesn't mean your work is less, and there are a lot of people like that in the book that, especially if you're younger, they just cannot buy land and they are still doing the work. And in some ways, that's almost more amazing to me that people are having sheep and don't even have necessarily always a place to put them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, you know, there's economic privilege there, but then, like I say, I'm really conflicted about imposter syndrome too, because I think it is a negative thing when, you know, someone is trying to make us feel that we don't belong somewhere that we do, whether it's like in an office or serving in government. Mm-hmm. But it's also a useful gut check against my own privilege, where maybe we don't belong everywhere, or we should listen and learn when we're in a space instead of participating. Right. So it's especially with me, like I'm a white woman. I have always been able to basically go everywhere or feel like unassumed that I could belong everywhere. And that's an ability that we take completely for granted and that might not be true. So I really have been wanting to, you know, it's this fraught thing where like you definitely don't want people to have such imposter syndrome that they don't do agricultural work or any other kind of work that they're feeling really pulled to do, but that you're very conscious of being in a new space where there are lots of other people there before you. And in my case, right, I wrote a book where I'm effectively speaking for farmers or speaking for people, which is another, you know, gutsy move. But that's why I would send chapters. I sent chapters to every person who is in the book. And I said, do you feel like this reflects our conversation, that it reflects your work? Like, did I get it right? Because I'm not the contract grazer. I am not the weaver. I am not the farmer. And yet people are saying, well, I'm not going to write it, so somebody has to do it for me. And so you just have to be very conscious that you're not speaking for somebody else too in a way they don't want. So it's very fraught for me. I don't have any clear answers. You know, it's a big gray area.
No, it's a really interesting, it's a super interesting topic, I think. This idea that you're the one who wants to write about it and you're the one who has the interest in writing about it, but is it really yours to write about? Right. And that's interesting.
But it sort of becomes yours by default because no one else is writing about it. So
well, and it reminds me of the story that I was talking about last time. The other part of kind of what made things click for me about what I wanted to be able to do with the yarn shop is the mother and daughter, you know, who had such beautiful sheep and beautiful fleeces. And she was asking me for advice about how to get her yarn to sell, you know, the few skeins that they had put into a shop. And it's like, okay, that's something I think I know how to do, right? I mean, I don't want to, it's the same kind of, I think it's the same kind of thing. I don't want to take away the grower's ability to sell their own wool, but that's not their main interest. So if Marsha and I can be the people who allow them to focus on what they want to focus on, but have a market for what they're producing, then that's kind of where, it's kind of like that's where I fit. But how do you do that without feeling like you're usurping something that's not yours? Yeah.
Right.
Oh, interesting. Very interesting.
It is. And I think I come across that a lot. I think when you were just saying about where do I fit, everyone asks me, when are you getting sheep? And I'm like, well, I still have no land. But now I think what makes me feel better about having become a shearer is that the people whose sheep I shear say, please don't get sheep. Because then you won't have any time for mine. And they're so right. And I think that more than anything else has made me realize that our places can still be valuable. You know, it's all how you look at it. Like I might think that being a farmer is the most valuable thing because they're the people I respect the most, but that like all of us can't be farmers, right? That wouldn't work either. Because then who would be shearing and who would have the yarn shop?
Yeah. Exactly.
You know, so that helps me when someone says, no, I really value what you're doing.
Yeah. Your spot in this.
Yeah. And there's, there are a million levels to it too. With shearers, for example, your total numbers sheared and how many sheep you shear in a day is sort of this badge of honor, right? So people post when they've sheared their first 100 sheep in a day, their first 1,000 sheep total, their first 10,000 sheep. I once heard this phrase from somebody from New Zealand who was like, well, you're not a real shearer till you've sheared 100,000.
Oh my gosh.
And that is something that, when I got into shearing, it was to help people with the smallest flocks, because I heard they had the hardest time getting people to come because shearers get paid on a per head basis. And so it's the same drive time and setup as it is for 50 sheep or 500 sheep as it is for 10. So some shearers just don't want to do a handful of sheep. But I really don't mind that. I don't always want to shear 50 or 60 sheep in a day or more. I don't mind it because I feel like I pay myself enough to make it worthwhile. But of course and I call them like my bread and butter flocks. But I'm very conscious that in the shearing community, sometimes everyone is really shearing 100 to 300 sheep in a day. And they're driving all over the West to do it. Or they might be working half the year in Australia and New Zealand. And I would love to be that person. But it would require me to be away from home for like 7 months.
Right.
I'm 41. I'm married. I love my husband.
Yeah.
I don't actually want, he is not a shearer. Everybody asks me. And so I think that you have to pause and say, but what I'm doing is what's working for me and it does help people. And so sometimes I get those weeks where there's, thousands of sheep and there's 6 shearers and we have a good time, but it's okay if I'm not that shearer because all the calls I get are mostly for smaller flocks. So, there's even in the community, once you've made that choice, it's like imposter syndrome is just, it really just never stops giving, does it?
Right.
Like,
yeah. Well, I think the small flock thing, like if you do this, you can't do this other. I mean, sometimes it sounds like sometimes you are able to do the larger jobs, but yeah, if you do this, you can't do that. And that's just life. And realizing that, well, that's a path that I might be interesting, but I'm not going to do it. Like shearing in New Zealand, or like for me, I'm not going to have a full-time yarn business. I like my other job too much, and if I did that, I couldn't do what I'm doing now, teaching. So,
right.
Yeah, it's, yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to get us back to that concept of Renaissance people where everyone used to be, be a painter and a sculptor or have a business. And nobody seemed to think that odd then, but it's as if today we want some sort of like intensity and like if you're the one thing that you are instead of the many things. I find it culturally puzzles me sometimes.
I think sometimes that's how we define people. Well, this is what they do. So, and there's no room for we don't understand something else that they might do. So, I had a question though, because you are shearing small flocks. Are the small flocks that you're shearing, is most of that wool going for industrial? I mean, I guess industrial use is the correct word, or is it going for hand spinners, or do you know?
Well, the volume is really small, so it really wouldn't qualify unless it was pooled to go into the massive sort of, the industrial garment industry. So for most folks, there's a combination of things that happens. Some keep it for themselves for hand processing. Some send it with me up to one of our local mills, and I can drive it up there for them, and then it can come back to them as roving. So in a way, I'm almost like a broker, or at least a shipper. And then some people just use it for compost if it's really low quality wool. Really short and dirty and coarse or something like that. They'll use it for mulching. But mostly it's for their own projects or their own small fiber lines. So if they're, sending it to a mill, it'll be to a very good mill, Mendocino Wool and Fiber or Valley Oak Wool Mill in California or Mountain Meadows in Wyoming are some of the common mills people use. And then they'll have it made into small batches of roving and or yarn.
I remember at the Black Sheep Gathering, every year when Kelly and I go, we sit and we listen to the judging. And one of the things they were talking about was some of the fleeces had second cuts. And then they would also say maybe the staple wasn't long enough or it was too long.
Yeah.
And what I realized was because there's a shortage of shearers, the producers have to wait for the time that the shearer can come. And so sometimes they just have to have their sheep sheared because the shearer is there. So maybe the staple's not long enough, or it's grown too much, and that's why they have a really long staple, because it's depending on when isn't that correct? Is that true what I'm understanding it?
Yeah, I think most people for me are on an annual cycle. Some sheep just don't get a long staple. It's the other thing. So that can be a breed thing or a nutrition thing. Some people really love a long staple. They're really going for that 6 to 9 inch. Yeah. Even though it might not be, even though in some cases, right, some of those folks I think could probably shear twice a year. But then who wants to pay the shearer twice a year? Right? That's the other thing. Why would you pay twice? But, you know, it can get tippy or it can get dirty. So it's sort of, I think there's so many things going into that choice. But I know folks who can afford to, or, you know, maybe they have an unusual or a very high quality fiber that they're able to make that money back. I have many customers who shear twice a year. And some of that is the breeds are like Navajo Churro and Icelandic, and they can get matted and felted if you don't shear every 6 months. But some are just these sheep that put out, you know, very long staple fiber, and they're happy to shear twice a year and get 3 inches each time, and then get, you know, almost kind of like a double batch of fiber off of one animal for the year. It's that much more yarn, it's that much more roving that they can add to their business. So
just think of all those fleeces.
Yes. They are pretty.
Well, and the other thing I was going to say is how important your job is, too, for preparing the fleeces for shows, because the judges were talking about, because you do the skirting as well, too, don't you?
It depends. On a large job, hopefully we have somebody else skirting, because shearing is sort of all you can do. Sometimes if it's a very small flock, you know, 10 sheep or fewer, I can set the fleeces aside and skirt them afterward. But usually, if it's a larger day, some people are interested in doing the skirting. If there's, you know, 100 or more sheep and maybe a couple of us shearers, what often happens is that I will, for example, you know, pull the sheep from the pen, turn her onto her butt and look at her ear tag, and I'll call out the ear tag number, and then somebody will write that on a note card. And when that fleece comes off when I'm done, that fleece goes into a bag with the note card. And then, you know, it'll either be, or it might be skirted that moment or skirted later so that we have traceability and we know who's whose. But sometimes we can, you know, if it's just me, we can shear one day and skirt the next day, or shear in the morning and skirt in the afternoon. You kind of just do whatever you have to do, right? Based on the situation. But yeah, we try to do that just because you don't want them sitting too long unskirted, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and I think my real point is that how important your job is. Well, maybe I should back up and just say the only fleeces I've seen are just the ones that are at the Black Sheep being judged, or at Fiber Fusion, being you know in a show they're being judged. And so one of the things they talk about is about what the shearer may have done or may not have done, and it really made me realize that your job is so important to, in part, with what the producer's doing with, you know, nutrition and the health of the sheep and everything, and just Mother Nature, and then also what you can do to make the fleece look nice, you know, and the proper skirting and the proper shearing. How important your role is.
Oh, thank you.
In all of this.
Yeah, I mean, you do. There are things we are there to improve wool quality, which it means improving the price that everyone gets for their wool, whether it is, you know, being sold at a fiber festival or going to commercial industry. So, you know, and there's all these little things like sweeping the floor between every sheep. there's that every fleece should be coming onto a plywood as clean as possible. Making sure the sheep have been brought in overnight, that they're not wet, so that the wool is not going to, molder and rot when it's all bunched up, that the sheep were dry when you sheared them. That's another thing. So there are all these little things that do improve the fleece quality. Of course, second cuts are, I hate making them. Sometimes they can't be avoided, but you really try not to, yes.
Yeah. The good thing about, I know, like, as a new spinner, when I was first looking at fleeces, you tend to focus on the things you can recognize about a fleece, and the thing you can recognize before you know anything else about fleece is a second cut. And so you're like, oh, well, this, I'd be at the auction, oh, well, this fleece has second cuts, I don't think I want it. Of all the problems that a fleece could have, that's one of the that's super minor problems, because you just shake it out and they go flying, and then when you're washing, more of them go away. And so, I mean, if it was throughout, consistently throughout every single bit of the fleece, but I remember as a newer spinner, looking at a fleece that had a couple of second cuts and totally discounting it, and now that would never be a disqualification in my mind.
Yes.
Be like, well, I'll just pull that out, and this fleece will be beautiful. Another area to talk about, and oh my gosh, there's so much. I have so much on my show notes that we could have several episodes of conversation, but we won't keep you through every bit of this. But one of the things that I just wanted to bring up, and then you can pick from any of the other things you want to talk about in the show notes. But this idea, and our listeners have heard it, about the work that Fibershed is doing, and the carbon farming plans that are being produced, and I think it's called the Carbon Farming Institute.
There is the Carbon Cycle Institute, and then also the Marine Carbon Project.
Okay. Yep. So maybe I'm conflating those two things.
That's okay. They're both wonderful. They're wonderful.
Yeah. Super interesting. I have probably talked about this more times than I can count on the podcast, but just the whole idea that the way someone farms could actually improve the climate change situation is just so fascinating. And you talk about it a little bit in your book too. And I had told on the podcast one time a quote that it was such a hopeful comment that Lani, of Lani's Lana and Bear Ranch, and that's the yarn that Stephany was talking about earlier, that she made the hat out of, and it's some of the yarn that we have in our shop, the Replenish Rambouillet. But her comments that agriculture is the only thing big enough to make the change that we need. And I just was like, okay, that's a little scary, that's the only thing big enough. But it's also so hopeful, because there is something big enough to make the kind of huge change that needs to happen to sort of shift the future in terms of climate change.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of things. I'm glad that you always wonder when you're writing your first book, especially totally in private, like, maybe I'm the only one maybe everybody else will be super bored by this part.
No, it's so fascinating.
I hope not. But, it is I think especially the media does not do enough job talking about solutions. It's easy to feel very depressed, and especially in the face of the recent IPCC report that we are doomed. And I think what is so important to me about carbon farming, and this is so funny to me too, because I'm like, right, the ranchers all knew this already. Like, here comes slow urban Stephany with like, oh wow, carbon in the soil is amazing, and every gardener is like, yeah, carbon belongs in the soil, genius, But it was super hopeful to me. I'm driving all over, and I'm shearing, and I'm meeting all these people through wool and shearing, and the point why I really wanted it to be in the book is that the people we least expect of doing it are doing some of the hardest, most thankless, and most important work that there could literally be happening right now.
Yeah.
And I'm one of those folks where I don't really care about your reason for doing something. I care about the outcome, right? So if you're a rancher and you care, about these 37 or so-called carbon farming practices, or they're also called conservation practices, that are recognized by the U.S., the NRCS, and the USDA and other organizations like that as being established conservation methods, that I don't care if you're doing it to improve the water holding capacity of your soil, which is it's an important outcome, especially in a drought state like California, right? Yeah. The more water that soil can hold, the less the farmer needs to pay to irrigate with, and the less water that gets used for irrigation. So it's this huge benefit. And I don't care if you're planting a hedgerow to stop, soil from blowing away and to keep it in place, or to have dye plants, or both. It's not that I don't appreciate it. It's just that I don't need to agree with somebody on all of their reasons for doing something, right, or what they believe in or what they don't, as long as it's happening. And that was important to me, because really, folks that are doing this work are all over the map politically, which I specifically leave out of my book because I don't want people to be, I think their work would be interpreted differently if people knew, who aligned more or less where. But it's also just not totally relevant,
Yeah.
And it was amazing to me that it's so simple. When we hear about this doom and gloom about the climate, everyone's like, well, we're going to need these tools and we're going to have to get everybody to stop driving. And I focus a lot on the 4 per 1,000 initiative, which is that, look, we have almost 600 million farms or something in the world. So if just 4% of every 1,000 acres were converted to using different methods, we can basically hit break even and mitigate the current emissions levels. This is a big thing. And it's using soil. It's using soil. And it is so simple. It's so available. You don't need to do it everywhere. You just need to do it some places. We can start doing it right away. We could definitely be doing policies and funding to make that more attainable, because these practices are, as I point out in the book, they are costly for farmers to implement. Buying and spreading compost over 10,000 acres is no joke financially. So,
right. It just seems like that just sounds kind of hard to imagine.
It does, but it's so doable, right? Like you buy compost and you spread it with a tractor.
Right.
And as long as you can buy the compost and do it, you've created these amazing outcomes. And so, I don't want to get into, this is like the one thing that can save us, but it really can go a long way. The science is very established about it, and finding more interesting things every day, like the Goddamn lab at UC Davis and the Silver lab at Berkeley. And so it's when the ranchers all over the West and the, the research labs are kind of agreeing about the potential to mitigate climate change, you just can't ignore that.
Right. Well, and the thing that I thought was so interesting in the talk that I heard that one year that I did go to the Wool Symposium, it was sort of this idea of a virtuous cycle, so that the benefit actually compounds over time.
It does.
Because you have this one benefit which causes another benefit, which causes a greater benefit, and then all of a sudden you have this compounding that means the effect is getting bigger and bigger and bigger from the initial thing that you did. I don't know. It just
it's an important point, because Jeff Kreck of the Marine Carbon Project he says that, he makes that point, because it's like the good version of the cycles that are driving the acceleration of melting ice, right? Where like the ice melts and then, there's less reflecting back off the ice. Like it's
more
this whole
absorption.
Thing. Right. So what you have with the compost application in particular, it was in a paper by a researcher named Rebecca Riles and Wendy Silver. And they showed that a single scant, almost sort of casual application of compost did not just increase the carbon sequestration that year, but it increases the soil system's ability to sequester carbon for the next 100 years. Right? That's a pretty important feedback loop. So it makes that single application of compost so much more worthwhile, and so much more, when you think about cost, so much more valuable.
Right. Yeah.
And so there really is those feedback loops. I think the science is still trying to understand those more and better. But then also the compost increases water holding capacity. And also it increases the ability of some native species, or grazing increases the ability of some native plant species to come back and restore themselves. And those native grass species have deeper roots and they pull water down into the soil. And so it's like you said, one thing feeds the next thing, right?
Yeah. No, it's very exciting. And I'm glad you're talking about it in the kind of detail and background knowledge that I was not able to do when I came back from the Fiber Shed Wool Symposium and talked to our listeners about. It's like, it's good. It's good. and this is a lot of important reasons why it's good. And Stephany has a whole chapter in her book about carbon farming, and that's I just think it's really important for people to see and hear how this can really work. So thank you for that. I don't want to keep you. We've been going for a long time. We can definitely chat again if you're ever interested. But is there anything else on the list of topics that you want to make sure we don't miss?
Oh, gosh, that's such a difficult question. I do. I think for listeners, I will have to give it a plug as an overlooked job opportunity. So when I was speaking earlier about, not being that person who can fly off necessarily. I mean, I could, I just don't want to go to Australia or go to New Zealand or travel all over the West Shearing. I really can't tell you how much I wish I'd known about this when I was 18.
Right.
Or 22 and not attached. And, being able to drive all over and live out of your truck and make a really decent living. And I think it is we're realizing about a lot of trades right now is that there is some important work to be done that doesn't happen in an office, that you can have your own business, and that shearing and I think raising animals as well, but also contract grazing where, you own a flock of sheep and they graze, especially in the West, for fire control and mitigation, and vineyards as well, right? Like I say in the book, sheep grazing reduces the need or eliminates the need for external fertilizer inputs, and it helps vineyards and orchards maintain their organic and biodynamic certifications. There's a huge need for sheep that graze, and every contract grazing operation that I know is growing, has many more sheep than when it started, still can't keep up with demand. We need shepherds. Right now, the only way to find skilled shepherding labor in most cases, with rare exception, is to have shepherds come in on the H-2A visa program from places and cultures that have not broken their shepherding tradition. So Peru and Uruguay are two of those. And we don't have that tradition anymore. We stopped that tradition a couple 2 or 3 generations ago in most cases. So learning how to shepherd the animals, move the fencing, move them and care for them and pay attention to their health and help with lambing. These are all things we need, and it's very difficult to find skilled people who want to do it.
Or even who know that it's available to do. I think that's the thing that I see a lot with my students is there's a limited number of careers that people have in their mind as possible. And who grows up thinking I want to be a shepherd? It's it's not even there as a possible career, or I want to own a business with contract grazing, or I'm going to have my own shearing business. But I think there are tremendous opportunities.
That's such an important point, because that is what makes me personally the saddest, is that because I grew up in an urban area, I just had no clue. There were factory jobs, there were service jobs, and there were office jobs. And that was it. You know, that was it. There was no work to be made in agriculture. Everyone has to live in cities. It's the knowledge economy. You know, you can't even make money in the trades, and it was just not true. And there are so many jobs that need doing, and that's why I chose to mention this one, is because look into it wherever you are, wherever you live. Are people looking for shearers? Do they need sheep to graze? You know, can you start with 2? You know, if I had an acre or 2, I could probably have a couple of sheep and take them places and pretty safely in the back of just like a regular pickup truck and get started that way. And even as a side gig, right? And I don't mean it in a mean way. Like, I am so jealous of every kid that gets to do 4-H, you know?
Right.
And might get exposed to those other careers that way, because it is so sad that we have so few in our minds that we even know about. So,
Yeah.
Stephany, what I think is really interesting about you is that you're a sheep shearer who lives in San Francisco. That's not a hotbed of sheep in San Francisco.
No, but there,
that's a very urban.
It is, and people are like, "Well, you don't think it's funny when the farmers bring the food into the city, but when I go out to the sheep is like a different story." There are a few reasons for that, which is, of course, that San Francisco in the 11 years that I've been living here has become exorbitantly expensive. It was California always costs more than other places, but it is now to the point where we really can't afford to move. You know how it is with for the non-California listeners, your property taxes are fixed when you buy a house.
Right.
So if you bought an affordable house and your property taxes are a small percentage of that house and they're not going to go up, you have a very good sense of what you have to make every year to pay taxes to keep your house. So if we were to sell our house for more money now, which we could, we would then be buying a more expensive place.
Right.
We'd be paying higher property taxes that we really can't afford. So it's like, you're like, well, okay, this is where we're staying, which is great. But, you know, you also, that was the thing where I said, you know, that's the usual story. The usual story is person buys farm, person gets animals, person has funny adventures and hijinks ensue, and yet they choose the farm. That's the story.
Yeah.
And what about when you can't afford the farm, or you're not sure, or you want to test the agricultural waters a bit? You know, is that supposed to stop you, or is there another way? Right? And
it sounds like there's other ways. Yeah.
There are other ways, and there are a lot of sheep. There are a lot of sheep near me that I never would have found. I have quite a few jobs in, you know, Pacifica, Montara, Half Moon Bay, that are 15 to 30 minutes drive from my house. There are some in the city. I feel like I shouldn't disclose their locations because I don't know
right.
the city line.
Yeah, no, that's
kind
fine.
of like my bees and chickens.
Exactly.
Yeah,
you're very careful with but there are some city sheep. They're at various schools that find that sort of thing important.
Yeah.
Or in somebody's larger backyard, but they're around, and it's feasible.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I thought was you don't have to live necessarily a rural lifestyle to have a rural business. That makes sense. You know, And I think again, we don't think anything. I was like, what do I call this? Do I call it urban privilege? People commute from very, very far away for city jobs. They drive from Stockton to work in San Francisco. And that is considered completely normal. Nobody bats an eye. It might be terrible, but we're like, well, of course that happens.
Right.
And we just wouldn't think of doing the reverse, right? But why not? Why not? Maybe we could think about that. You know, maybe you could live in your city apartment and go do an agriculture job.
I think that's a really interesting way to think about it, that kind of switch. If you would commute into the city, why wouldn't you commute somewhere? It doesn't sound like a commute when you go to a job like shearing, but it is. I mean, you're driving to work, right?
It is. And I will say this, it's the hardest part of the job for me. Because I hate driving. This is why I ended up in cities, because they have public transit.
There's no public transit out to the farm.
Yes, for a person whose family worked in auto factories, I'm a huge disappointment because I really never loved cars or driving. But there are ways to work around it, you know, hit the bridges before 6:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Well, I'm going to bring up just one other part of this overlooked job opportunities, because I thought it was so interesting when we were talking before, that you actually are doing some work towards getting this information about these job opportunities to juvenile offenders.
Yeah, it was funny because it's been an intention of mine. You know, every time I've been sharing, and I have shared, this actually started because a few years ago there's a couple guys I've shared with who've served time on and off. That's actually what got me thinking about it. I'm like, but like, who cares? We're in the sharing trailer. No one cares if you just got out of jail, right? Nobody knows. There was no background check for the sharing trailer. And I thought, wow, I would really love, if I had all the time on earth, to set up a sharing program like at San Quentin or at various prisons or at various juvenile facilities, because it is work where you get to be your own boss. It's pretty easy to get certified. You know, it's 5 days versus like years of school.
Yeah.
You get to be out in beautiful places. You get to work with animals, which has its own benefits, even when they're kind of difficult. The equipment investment is pretty minimal. So when I was first sharing, I didn't even buy like the big external motor and nicer handpiece, which can cost you about $1,450 to get started. I had a portable handpiece that those run between like $250 and $500. So you could get started.
Yeah.
For pretty little money and educational cost and investment. You know, shearing school is subsidized at Hopland. It's under $300 a week still, I think. So I kept thinking about that, and then I did shear at a juvenile detention facility earlier this year, and it was nice because some of the kids were there and they got some practice sheep handling, and if I was doing a move when I was shearing, I had them really looking at what I was doing, and I was describing what I was doing, and I hope that they got the bug. It's how to set up programs for at those facilities, because people can't always leave to go take school someplace else. Having a place where there's sheep handling facilities and fences and a place for all of the shearers to work and teach students. I haven't worked out the logistics of all of that, but it's something that I'm wanting to do more of, and I'm working on it. And then, of course, I have I think it would, it's easy for me, again, like, I'm a white woman and I happen to have blonde hair, right? So driving across rural America, I don't get a lot of, no one's really worried about me showing up.
Right.
And when I'm working with people of color, I worry sometimes. Like, would I be giving somebody a false sense of security about how this is going to go? But I really try to examine that. Like, would this be as advisable or as easy for someone who doesn't look like me in terms of where the job requires you to go? But in my experience, when I'm feeling a little more optimistic, what I have seen, I have not, honestly, I'm sure everybody's experience is different. I, for example, do not believe that in my sharing time I have experienced sexism. Because everyone is paid equally. Every shearer makes the same. And
it's about the work.
It's about the work. And people are so grateful. Like, there is so much work to be done. And farmers are usually going it so alone that when somebody skilled can show up and just do the job,
right,
it is so helpful and so important that in general, people really don't seem to care very much about who the person is.
Right. It's about whether you can do the job.
It's about whether you can just do the job and get it done, because everybody is so busy and everything is so labor intensive. And I really believe that would extend to people of color as well. I do know some shearers of color. I know some wool handlers of color. I definitely know farmers of color. And so I think, but I just have to be very conscious about what I'm telling, frankly, a young black man to expect.
Right.
Because I can't possibly know.
It might be slightly different, or it might be vastly different. But yeah. But I do think that when you're in an industry where the work is hard, it's about doing the work.
That has been my experience so far. There is such a need for the work. That's what I keep coming back to.
Yeah.
There's such a need for the work.
Yeah. There's a demand. There's a demand. There's a living to be made. And there's a satisfaction, I think, to very physical work that gets done. Like office work, I mean, even my work in teaching, it's like I don't always go home at the end of the day and feel like the job got done. There's the things I didn't get to and the stuff that's long term, and it's going to be, the same work is still going to be going on 3 months from now. I at least have the end of the semester
Yes.
Phew, finished, good, right? But there's so many jobs don't have that sense of completion, and I think that's a real plus to this kind of work too. You shear the sheep, you can count them, you know how much you accomplished.
It's true.
You can see the work is done. So in that way, very satisfying.
It is, and it doesn't follow you home. Unless you did something really wrong with the sheep, it doesn't follow you home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, I think that's wonderful. I wish you really all the luck in the world with this next endeavor of trying to figure out how you're going to, move in that direction.
Thank you.
I heard a saying the other day. This comes from the Talmud, and I'm not going to quote it correctly, but the idea of it was that the work is not your responsibility to finish, but you can't ignore the fact that you have to start or do it.
Oh, I love that.
And yeah, I wish I had the actual quote, but I just thought, okay, that's a relief.
It is, right?
There's so many things we want to do, and it's like, okay, I'm not going to be able to do this. It's too big. Well, you don't need to finish it. You just need to start it. So I wish you a lot of luck on that.
Thank you.
That sounds like a really interesting project.
Very worthwhile, yeah. And you're going to inspire somebody, I know.
Thank you. I hope so.
To become a sheep shearer.
I feel a little evangelical about it sometimes. I'm like, come on.
Yeah.
Oh, hey.
I need somebody in the Sierra foothills. Doesn't anyone want to be the shearer out there?
Yeah.
Right. Well, you'll find someone. You'll inspire someone. Marsha's right. So,
yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. This is so much fun.
It has
so
been
much fun. Thank you.
This has been great.
Fabulous to talk to you. We could talk for hours more, I'm sure, but we all have things to do.
Yeah.
So you're welcome to come back anytime, and it doesn't have to be for your next book.
Thank you so much. I love the show, and it was really an honor. I so appreciate your support.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Hi, this is Kelly popping in here from Editing Time to add in something that we found out after we got done talking, and that is that Stephany is going to be at the Seward Park location of Third Place Books. So for those listeners in the Seattle area, that will be on November 28th. Again, that's the Seward Park location of Third Place Books. She'll be there for a book reading and author event on November 28th. So if you are intrigued by her book and this conversation, check out Third Place Books on November 28th. All right. Well, I'm just going to mention one housekeeping business item, and that is that our winter weave along has started. I have a thread in the Ravelry group. I've entitled it We Slay, but of course spelled S-L-E-Y, because that's what you do when you weave.
Okay.
Yes.
I learned a new word, Kelly. I didn't know that.
Marsha, that was when you pulled all those threads through the
Oh, that's right.
That's called slaying.
Okay.
So we have the winter weave along going on. It's going all the way till the end of March. In the Ravelry group, at the top, you see tabs. And those tabs, one of the tabs is called Pages. And in the Pages tab, I have the handouts from last year's winter weave along. And then I have 2 new handouts from this year's winter weave along. So I wanted to alert people to that's available. Do we have other business, Marsha, that we need to?
Just mention again the Learn Along.
The Learn Along. It ends at the end of November.
November. Yeah.
We'll be drawing for that at the beginning of December.
All right. Stephany, it was very nice talking to you. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much.
Very nice.
Yes, thank you so much. It was a lot of fun.
All right.
All right. Bye,
Okay,
everyone.
thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening. To subscribe to the podcast, visit 2usfiberadventures.com.
Join us on our adventures on Ravelry and Instagram. I am Better in Motion, and Kelly is 100 Projects.
Until next time, we're the 2 U's
Doing our part for World Fleece.